The late afternoon sun filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Mary's Church, casting kaleidoscopic patterns across the wooden pews. Sarah Matthews knelt in the front row, her fingers clutching rosary beads so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. The familiar scent of incense and old wood should have brought her comfort, but today it felt suffocating. "Sarah, dear, you've been praying for nearly an hour." The gentle voice belonged to Sister Catherine, whose soft footsteps echoed in the empty nave. "Is everything all right?" Sarah looked up, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just seeking guidance, sister. You know how it is." Sister Catherine's weathered face creased with concern. At 62, she had seen enough troubled souls to recognize the signs of inner turmoil. "Perhaps we could talk? Sometimes sharing our burdens makes them lighter." "I'm fine, really." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. She rose from the kneeler, smoothing down her conservative blue dress. "I should get home. Mother will be expecting me for dinner." As she walked toward the heavy oak doors, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. Her heart skipped when she saw the sender's name, Emma. The message was simple: library, 8 p.m., section M. Sarah deleted the message immediately, a habit she'd developed over the past 6 months. She glanced back at Sister Catherine, who was arranging flowers on the altar, completely unaware of the storm raging in Sarah's chest. The drive home through the quiet streets of Millbrook felt eternal. This small Ohio town had been her entire world for 23 years. Tree-lined streets, white picket fences, and neighbors who knew each other's business. It was the kind of place where secrets festered in the shadows of respectability. At home, the Matthews family dinner table was a portrait of traditional American values. Pastor David Matthews sat at the head, his graying temples and stern expression commanding respect. Sarah's mother, Margaret, served pot roast with practiced efficiency, her movements precise and economical. "How was your day at the church, sweetheart?" Pastor Matthews asked, cutting his meat with deliberate strokes. "Peaceful. I spent time in prayer and helped Sister Catherine with the flower arrangements." Sarah pushed food around her plate. Her appetite vanished. "That's wonderful. Community service builds character." He paused, studying his daughter's face. "You seem distracted lately. Is there something on your mind?" Sarah's fork froze midway to her mouth. "No, Father. Just thinking about my college applications." "Speaking of which," Margaret interjected, refilling water glasses, "the Hendersons mentioned their son Michael is home from seminary school. Perhaps we could invite them for dinner this weekend?" The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah knew exactly what her parents were implying. Michael Henderson had been their neighbor's pride and joy since childhood, destined for the ministry, clean-cut, and from a good Christian family. The perfect match for a pastor's daughter. "That sounds lovely," Sarah managed, the words tasting like ash. After dinner, Sarah retreated to her room, claiming she needed to study. But as 7:30 approached, restlessness consumed her. She told her parents she was going to the library to research her college essay, which wasn't entirely a lie. The Millbrook Public Library was nearly deserted at 8 p.m. Mrs. Johnson, the elderly librarian, barely looked up from her romance novel as Sarah entered. The familiar smell of old books and carpet cleaner enveloped her as she made her way to Section M, Modern Literature. Emma was already there, pretending to browse a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. At 21, Emma Reeves was everything. Sarah wasn't allowed to be confident, artistic, with short auburn hair that caught the fluorescent lights. She wore dark jeans and a fitted black sweater that would have scandalized Sarah's mother. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Emma whispered, not looking directly at Sarah. "I almost didn't." Sarah pulled a random book from the shelf, using it as a prop. "This is getting dangerous." Living is dangerous. Emma's green eyes finally met Sarah's, and the intensity there made Sarah's breath catch. "We need to talk. Really talk. Not these stolen moments between library stacks." You know I can't. Sarah. Emma's voice was barely audible, but it stopped. Sarah's protest cold. I got the acceptance letter from the art program in Portland today. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Portland was 3,000 miles away from Ohio, from everything Sarah had ever known. From her. That's wonderful, Sarah stammered. You deserve it. Your art is incredible. Come with me. The suggestion was so quietly spoken that Sarah wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. What? Portland. Come with me. We could have a life there, Sarah. A real life. Sarah's hands trembled as she gripped the book tighter. Around them, the library felt simultaneously too large and too small. The weight of everything unspoken, everything impossible, pressed down on her chest. Emma, you know that's not possible. Why? Because of your father? Because of this town? Because of what people might think? Because it's wrong. The words came out automatically, programmed by years of conditioning. But even as she said them, they felt foreign in her mouth. Emma stepped closer, close enough that Sarah could smell her perfume. Something light and floral that was nothing like the heavy, conservative scents her mother wore. Does this feel wrong to you? Before Sarah could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed from the main library area. They sprang apart, both grabbing random books and pretending to read. Mrs. Johnson shuffled past their aisle, barely glancing in their direction. When the librarian's footsteps faded, Emma leaned close to Sarah's ear. Meet me tomorrow night. The old covered bridge on Miller Road. 11 p.m. Sarah wanted to say no. Every rational part of her mind screamed that she should go home, pray for forgiveness, and never see Emma Reeves again. But her heart, that traitorous organ, was already saying yes. I'll think about it, she whispered. Emma smiled, the first real smile Sarah had seen from her in weeks. That's all I ask. As they left the library separately, Sarah felt the ground beneath her feet shifting. Tomorrow night would change everything. She could feel it in her bones, in the way her pulse quickened when Emma looked at her, in the growing certainty that she was standing at the edge of a cliff with only two choices: jump or spend the rest of her life wondering what it would have felt like to fly. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and racing thoughts. In less than 24 hours, she would have to decide between the life she'd always known and the terrifying possibility of something real. Sarah stared at her bedroom ceiling until dawn, watching shadows shift across the familiar cracks in the plaster. The house creaked and settled around her, each sound amplified in the pre-morning quiet. Sleep had been impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Emma's face, heard those 4 words echoing in her mind. Come with me. The morning routine felt surreal. She showered, dressed in her usual modest attire, and joined her family for breakfast, as if her entire world hadn't tilted off its axis 12 hours earlier. Her father read passages from scripture, while her mother served scrambled eggs and toast. Sarah mechanically ate, tasting nothing. You look tired, dear, Margaret observed, studying her daughter with maternal concern. Are you feeling well? Just stayed up too late studying, Sarah lied, avoiding her mother's penetrating gaze. The ease with which deception now came to her was both disturbing and liberating. Pastor Matthews looked up from his Bible. Remember, Sarah, our bodies are temples. We must care for them properly. Early to bed, early to rise. There's wisdom in the old sayings. Yes, Father. After breakfast, Sarah volunteered to run errands in town, desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere of home. She drove aimlessly through Millbrook's familiar streets, past the hardware store where Mr. Thompson had worked for 40 years, past the diner where the same group of retired men gathered every morning to solve the world's problems over coffee and pie. On impulse, she parked in front of Henderson's Market. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and Mrs. Henderson looked up from arranging produce with a warm smile. "Sarah, sweetheart, how lovely to see you." The older woman's face lit up with genuine affection. "I was just telling your mother yesterday how much Michael is looking forward to seeing you again." Sarah's stomach clenched. "He's home from seminary?" "Arrived last night." "He's grown into such a fine young man, dedicated to his calling, just like his father was at that age." Mrs. Henderson selected the best apples, placing them in a paper bag. "Your mother mentioned perhaps having dinner together this weekend?" "Yes, she mentioned that." "Wonderful. Michael could use some familiar company. Seminary can be so isolating, you know. All those serious young men studying theology. It'll be good for him to spend time with someone who shares his values and upbringing." The weight of expectations pressed down on Sarah like a physical force. She could see the future Mrs. Henderson envisioned so clearly. Courtship, engagement, a wedding in St. Mary's with the entire town in attendance. Sarah in white, walking down the aisle toward a life of predictable contentment. 6 months ago, that future wouldn't have seemed like a prison sentence. "I should go," Sarah said abruptly, abandoning her pretense of shopping. "Please give Michael my regards." She fled the store before Mrs. Henderson could respond, leaving behind a wake of confusion and concern. The afternoon crawled by with agonizing slowness. Sarah helped her mother with household chores, mechanically folding laundry and dusting furniture while her mind raced. She found herself staring at family photographs, generations of Matthew's family portraits showing the same pattern. Respectable marriages, children raised in the church, lives lived according to prescribed expectations. At 4 p.m., her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Changed my mind about Portland. Leaving tonight instead of next month. Bridge at 11 still good?" Sarah's hands shook as she read the message twice, then deleted it. Tonight. Emma was leaving tonight, which meant, "Sarah?" Her mother's voice cut through the panic. "You're holding that dish towel like you're trying to strangle it." "Sorry." Sarah forced her hands to relax. Lost in thought. "About Michael?" The question hung in the air. Sarah looked at her. Mother really looked at her. Margaret Matthews was 51 but looked older. Lines of quiet resignation mapped her face, and her eyes held the particular weariness of dreams deferred. Had she ever stood where Sarah stood now? Had she ever felt the wild, desperate pull of possibility? "Mother," Sarah said carefully, "were you ever uncertain about your path?" Margaret's hand stilled on the china she was placing in the cabinet. "What do you mean, dear?" "Before you married Father, did you ever wonder about different choices?" For a moment, something flickered across Margaret's face. A ghost of the young woman she'd been before becoming a pastor's wife. "Everyone has moments of doubt, Sarah. It's natural. But we must remember that God's plan for us is always better than our own desires. But what if God's plan isn't what everyone expects it to be?" Margaret turned to face her daughter fully, and Sarah saw something that looked almost like fear in her eyes. "Sarah, what's brought this on? You seem so unsettled lately." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. Sarah had the sudden, wild urge to tell her mother everything. About Emma, about the feelings that kept her awake at night, about the choice she would have to make in 7 hours. Instead, she said, "Just pre-college nerves, I suppose." Relief washed over Margaret's features. "Of course, it's natural to be anxious about the future. But remember, dear, you don't have to face it alone. Your father and I will always guide you toward what's right." What's right? The phrase echoed in Sarah's mind as she retreated to her room. Who decided what was right? Her parents? The church? God? Or was there some deeper truth that she was supposed to discover for herself? At 10:30 p.m., Sarah stood at her bedroom window, car keys in her hand. The house was quiet, her parents asleep, trusting in their daughter's goodness and obedience. The old Sarah, the daughter they thought they knew, would already be in bed, saying her prayers and planning her safe, predictable future. But that Sarah was disappearing, replaced by someone she didn't fully recognize yet. Someone capable of lies and secrets and desperate choices. She slipped out of the house like a ghost, her car's engine seeming impossibly loud in the suburban silence. The drive to Miller Road took 15 minutes that felt like hours. Her headlights cut through darkness, illuminating familiar landmarks that suddenly seemed foreign and ominous. The covered bridge sat on the edge of town, a 19th century relic spanning a narrow creek. By daylight, it was picturesque, the kind of thing tourists photographed. By night, it felt like a threshold between worlds. Emma's car was already there, parked in the shadow of ancient oak trees. Sarah's heart hammered as she walked across the gravel, each footstep unnaturally loud. Emma stood in the center of the bridge, silhouetted against the darkness beyond. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Emma said without turning around. "I almost didn't." Sarah joined her at the bridge's center, their shoulders almost touching. Below them, water gurgled over smooth stones, a sound that might have been soothing under different circumstances. "I meant what I said yesterday. About Portland. About us." Sarah closed her eyes, trying to steady herself. "Emma, you have to understand what you're asking. This town, these people, they're my entire life." "Are you living, though? Really living?" The question cut deep, because Sarah knew the answer. For months, she'd felt like she was sleepwalking through her days, going through the motions of the life everyone expected while her real self remained hidden, suffocating. Emma turned to face her, and in the moonlight, her eyes were luminous with unshed tears. "I can't stay here anymore, Sarah. I can't keep pretending that what I feel for you is something shameful or wrong. I won't let them make our love into a sin. Our love..." The words hung in the air between them, finally spoken aloud after months of careful dancing around the truth. "I have a job lined up in Portland," Emma continued, her voice gaining strength. "A tiny apartment near the art district. It's not much, but it's a start. We could build something there, away from all this judgment and fear." Sarah felt the weight of generations pressing down on her. The Matthews family legacy, the town's expectations, the church's teachings. But stronger than all of that was the pull she felt toward Emma, toward the possibility of a life where she didn't have to hide who she was. "My parents would disown me," she whispered. "Maybe, or maybe they'd surprise you. But Sarah..." Emma reached out, her fingers barely brushing Sarah's hand. The contact was electric. "What if they did disown you? Would that be worse than spending your life pretending to be someone you're not?" In the distance, a church bell chimed midnight. Tomorrow was already here, bringing with it consequences that couldn't be undone. Sarah looked at Emma's face, memorizing every detail: the curve of her lips, the hope and desperation warring in her eyes, the way the moonlight caught in her auburn hair. This moment would change everything, she knew. After tonight, there would be no going back to the safe harbor of ignorance and denial. "Tell me about Portland," Sarah said quietly, and felt the first crack appear in the foundation of her old life. Emma's face transformed at Sarah's words, hope blazing across her features like sunrise. She pulled a worn envelope from her pocket, unfolding a letter with hands that trembled slightly. "The Pacific Arts Institute accepted me into their graduate program," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Full scholarship. I'd be studying under Rebecca Chen. She's one of the most respected contemporary artists in the country." Sarah took the letter, scanning the formal language that represented Emma's dreams made manifest. "This is incredible. When did you find out?" 3 weeks ago." Emma's voice carried a note of guilt. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you, or if I should tell you at all." The admission hit Sarah like a physical blow. 3 weeks of stolen moments and careful conversations, while Emma had been carrying this secret. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" "Because I was terrified you'd disappear, that you'd decide it was easier to let me go than to face what this means for us." Sarah folded the letter carefully, her mind reeling. Everything was moving too fast, the ground shifting beneath her feet with every revelation. "What exactly are you asking me to do, Emma?" "Come with me. Tonight. I've got everything packed in my car. Clothes, art supplies, enough money to get us started. We could be in Colorado by tomorrow evening, California by Wednesday. You want me to just leave without telling anyone, without saying goodbye?" Emma stepped closer, her eyes intense in the moonlight. "Sarah, you know as well as I do that saying goodbye isn't really an option. Your father would lock you in your room. Your mother would schedule emergency counseling sessions with Pastor Williams. They'd do everything in their power to save you from making this choice." The truth of Emma's words settled in Sarah's chest like a weight. She could picture the scene perfectly. The tears, the prayers, the desperate attempts to convince her that what she felt was temporary madness that could be cured with enough faith and determination. "But if I just disappear, they'll think something terrible happened to me. They'll call the police, organize search parties. We'll call them once we're safely away. From a payphone, somewhere they can't trace. You'll tell them you're safe and that you need time to think. It's not ideal, but Sarah..." Emma's voice broke slightly. "I can't live in this limbo anymore. These secret meetings, pretending we're just friends, when what I feel for you is so much more than that." Sarah looked out over the darkened landscape, rolling hills and farmland that stretched to the horizon, all of it familiar as her own reflection. This place had shaped her, defined her understanding of right and wrong, good and evil. Could she really just walk away from all of that? "What about college?" she asked weakly. "I'm supposed to start at Ohio State in the fall. You could transfer, or take a gap year while you figure out what you really want to study." "Sarah, you've been planning to major in elementary education because that's what pastors' daughters do, teach children or marry ministers. But is that what you actually want?" The question hung in the air, unanswered because Sarah had never allowed herself to truly consider alternatives. Her path had been predetermined from birth, laid out like a railroad track with no room for deviation. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never thought about it." "That's exactly my point. We've both been living the lives other people planned. For us, in Portland we could figure out who we really are." A car passed on the distant highway, its headlights sweeping across the hills before disappearing into the night. Sarah watched it go, envying the unknown driver's freedom to simply be in motion going somewhere. "Tell me what it would be like," she said quietly. Emma's expression softened. "We'd find a small apartment, maybe near Hawthorne or in the Alberta district. Somewhere with character, with old hardwood floors and big windows for the light. I'd paint during the day while you, whatever you decided to do, work, go to school, write. I've seen your journal, Sarah. You have a gift with words." "You've seen my journal?" A flush crept up Emma's neck. "That day at your house when you were getting us drinks. It was open on your desk, and I couldn't help but see a few lines. Sarah, you write like someone who sees the world differently than everyone else, like someone with stories to tell." Sarah had been writing in that journal for 3 years, pouring out thoughts and feelings she couldn't share with anyone else. The idea that Emma had glimpsed even a small part of that private world felt both violating and oddly intimate. "In the evenings," Emma continued, "we'd walk through the city, explore galleries and coffee shops and bookstores. On weekends, we could drive to the coast and watch the sunset over the Pacific. We'd build a life where we didn't have to hide what we mean to each other." The picture Emma painted was seductive in its simplicity. 2 young women starting over in a city where no one knew their history or their family's expectations. but Sarah's practical mind immediately jumped to the obstacles. How would we afford it? I have about $300 in my savings account. I've been working extra shifts at the bookstore for months, and I sold some paintings to a gallery in Columbus. I've got enough to cover first month's rent and security deposit, plus living expenses for a couple of months. After that, Emma shrugged. We'd figure it out. People do it all the time. Move somewhere new with nothing but hope and determination. And if it doesn't work out, if we get to Portland and realize we've made a terrible mistake? Emma was quiet for a long moment, studying Sarah's face in the pale light. Then at least we'll know we tried. But Sarah, I need you to understand something. I'm leaving tonight regardless of what you decide. I can't stay here anymore. Every day in this town feels like I'm slowly suffocating. The ultimatum wasn't delivered as a threat, but as a simple statement of fact. Emma had reached her breaking point, and she was offering Sarah one chance to come with her. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to imagine herself in 12 hours, either driving west toward an uncertain future or waking up in her childhood bedroom, pretending that this conversation had never happened. Both possibilities terrified her in different ways. What about your family? Sarah asked. Your mom? Pain flickered across Emma's features. Mom and I talked yesterday. She knows about us, about how I feel about you. Sarah's eyes flew open. She knows? How? Mothers see things. She's known for months that something was going on with me. Yesterday, she finally asked directly, and I couldn't lie to her anymore. Emma's voice was barely audible. She said she loves me no matter what, but that this town will never accept us. She thinks leaving might be the only way for me to have any chance at happiness. The revelation that Mrs. Reeves knew about their relationship sent a fresh wave of panic through Sarah. If Emma's mother suspected, how long before others did? How long before the whispers started, the pointed looks, the not-so-subtle suggestions that she needed prayer and counseling? Did she say anything about me? She's worried about you. She said you have the most to lose, and she doesn't want me to pressure you into making a decision you'll regret. In the distance, another church bell chimed. 1 a.m. Sarah realized, with growing alarm, that time was slipping away. Soon it would be dawn, and with it would come the impossibility of leaving undetected. If I said yes, Sarah said slowly, if I said I'd come with you, what happens next? How do we just disappear? Emma pulled a small slip of paper from her pocket. I wrote a letter to my mom explaining everything. You could write one too for your parents. We'd leave them somewhere they'd find them tomorrow morning, after we've had time to get some distance. A letter. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm supposed to explain 23 years of lies and pretending. In a letter? What else can you do? Stand in your living room and tell your father that you're in love with another woman. Tell him you're abandoning everything he raised you to believe in? The image Emma conjured was so impossible that Sarah almost laughed again. Her father's face, the shock and disappointment and righteous anger that would follow. It was unthinkable. He'd never forgive me, she whispered. Maybe not. But Sarah, you have to ask yourself, is his forgiveness worth more than your own happiness? Is anyone's? The question cut to the heart of everything Sarah had been struggling with for months. She thought of Michael Henderson, probably asleep in his childhood bedroom just a few miles away, blissfully unaware that he was being considered as her future husband. She thought of the dinner her parents were planning, the expectations being built around a relationship that could never be anything more than a careful performance. I'm scared, she admitted. I know, I'm scared too. But I'm more scared of spending my life wondering what if. Emma reached out tentatively, and this time Sarah didn't pull away when their fingers intertwined. The contact was electric, sending warmth up her arm and straight to her heart. We don't have much time. Emma said softly. "The sun will be up in 4 hours. If we're going to do this, we need to decide now." Sarah looked down at their joined hands, Emma's fingers long and paint-stained, her own soft and pale from a lifetime of careful protection. Such a small thing, holding hands, but in this place, at this moment, it felt revolutionary. "If I go with you," Sarah said, "I lose everything I've ever known." "If you don't," Emma replied, "you lose everything you could become." The truth of that statement settled over Sarah like a revelation. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't predetermined. A life where she could be completely, authentically herself without fear or shame. She thought of her journal, filled with secret dreams and half-formed longings. She thought of the way her heart raced whenever Emma smiled at her. She thought of the suffocating weight of expectations and the growing certainty that she could never be the daughter her parents wanted her to be. "Okay," she whispered, the word barely audible even to herself. Emma's eyes widened. "Okay?" "Yes, I'll come with you. I'll go to Portland." The moment the words left her mouth, Sarah felt something fundamental shift inside her. The sound of bridges burning, of doors closing, of an old life ending and a new one beginning. Emma's face transformed with joy and relief, but there was no time for celebration. They had work to do, and the night was already half gone. The drive back to town was surreal, Sarah following Emma's taillights through empty streets she'd traveled thousands of times, seeing them now as if for the first time. Every familiar landmark took on the weight of finality. The elementary school where she'd learned to read, the park where she'd had her 8th birthday party, the Methodist church where she'd been baptized at age 12. They parked behind the public library, where a single streetlight cast everything in harsh shadows. Emma's car was packed so efficiently it looked like a professional moving job, suitcases and boxes arranged with military precision, leaving just enough room for a passenger. "I can't take much," Sarah said, staring at the cramped space. "Just essentials. Clothes, documents, anything irreplaceable." Emma's voice was businesslike now, focused on logistics. "What about your car?" "I'll leave it at home. Taking it would be like putting up a billboard announcing where we've gone." Sarah felt a pang at the thought of abandoning the little Honda Civic her parents had given her for graduation. Her first taste of independence, now becoming a symbol of everything she was leaving behind. Smart thinking. "We'll drive straight, through to Denver, switch drivers every few hours. By tomorrow night we'll be in Portland." The plan sounded so simple when Emma laid it out, but as they sat in the shadow of the library, Sarah felt the magnitude of what they were about to do pressing down on her chest. "I need to go home and pack," she said, "and write the letter." Emma nodded. "I'll wait here. Take your time, but remember, we need to be on the road before dawn." The drive to her house took 5 minutes that felt like hours. Sarah parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, staring at the modest 2-story colonial where she'd lived her entire life. A light still glowed in her parents' bedroom window. Her father probably reading his Bible before sleep. Her mother perhaps working on tomorrow's Sunday school lesson. Inside, the house felt like a museum of her childhood. Family photos lined the hallway, documenting every milestone. First communion, high school graduation, church youth group trips. In every image, Sarah wore the same careful smile, the expression of a girl who knew exactly what was expected of her. In her bedroom, she moved with mechanical efficiency. A suitcase emerged from the closet, the same one she'd planned to take to college in 3 months. She packed quickly. Jeans and sweaters her mother would disapprove of, the few items of clothing that reflected her actual taste rather than parental expectations. Her journal went in first, followed by the small collection of books Emma had given her over the past year, poetry by Maya Angelou and Adrienne Rich that had opened new worlds in her mind. The hardest decision, was what? To leave behind. Her graduation dress, still in its plastic bag from the dry cleaner. Awards and certificates that had once seemed so important. The engagement ring that had belonged to her grandmother, waiting in its velvet box for the day Sarah would marry. A nice young man from a good family. She left it all, taking only what could fit in one bag and what she could carry in her heart. Then came the letter. Sarah sat at her desk, pen hovering over blank paper as she struggled to find words for the impossible. How do you explain a lifetime of secrets in a single page? How do you tell parents who love you that their love has been suffocating you? Dear Mom and Dad, she began, then stopped. The formal address felt wrong, but so did anything more intimate. How do you address people you're about to devastate? She started over. Mom and Dad, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Please don't be afraid for me. I'm safe, and I'm with someone who cares about me very much. I know this will be shocking and painful, and I'm sorry for that. But I need you to understand that I couldn't keep living the life you planned for me. For months, I've been pretending to be someone I'm not, saying things I don't believe, planning a future that would have made me miserable. The truth is, I'm in love, not with Michael Henderson or any of the nice young men from church you've been hoping I'd marry. I'm in love with Emma Reeves, and she's in love with me. I know this goes against everything you taught me, everything our church preaches, but I can't deny what I feel anymore. You raised me to be honest and brave, to follow my conscience even when it's difficult. That's what I'm doing now. I'm choosing to live authentically rather than hide behind a mask of respectability. I don't expect you to understand or approve. I know this will bring shame on our family in this town, and I'm sorry for that burden. But I hope someday you'll be able to see that I'm still the same person you raised. I'm just finally being honest about who that person is. Please don't look for us. We need time and distance to build our new life. I'll contact you when I'm ready, when enough time has passed that we can speak without anger or attempts at fixing me. I love you both more than you'll ever know. That's exactly why I have to go. Sarah. Sarah's hands shook as she sealed the envelope. 23 years of her life reduced to a few paragraphs of explanation and apology. It felt inadequate, but what words could possibly be sufficient for this moment? She placed the letter on her pillow where her mother would find it when she came to wake her for church, a detail that made Sarah's stomach clench with guilt. They'd discover her absence on Sunday morning, in front of the congregation that would become the source of whispers and speculation for months to come. A glance at her clock showed AM. Dawn was approaching faster than she'd expected. Sarah took one last look around her bedroom, memorizing details she'd never see again. The reading chair by the window where she'd spent countless hours. The desk where she'd written college application essays for a future that would never happen. The closet full of clothes chosen to project an image of modest propriety. On impulse, she grabbed a photo from her dresser, herself with her parents at last year's church picnic, all three of them squinting into the sunshine and smiling. Whatever else happened, she didn't want to forget the good moments, the genuine love that existed alongside all the expectations and restrictions. The house was silent as she crept downstairs, her suitcase bumping softly against each step. In the kitchen. She paused to leave her car keys on the counter where her mother would see them. A small gesture, but it would save them the additional worry of wondering if she'd been in an accident. Outside, the pre-dawn air was cool and sharp. With the promise of morning, Sarah loaded her suitcase into Emma's car, where Emma waited with the engine running. "Everything okay?" Emma asked softly. "No, but I did it." Sarah buckled her seatbelt with hands that still trembled slightly. "I left the letter." Emma reached over and squeezed her hand. "The hardest part is over." But as they pulled away from the curb, Sarah knew that wasn't true. The hardest part was just beginning. The long process of building a new life while grieving the old one, of discovering who she was when freed from others' expectations, of learning to live with the consequences of this choice. They drove through, sleeping Millbrook one last time, past the church where Sarah had been confirmed, past the school where she'd been valedictorian, past Emma's house where a single light glowed in an upstairs window. Mrs. Reeves, probably lying awake thinking about her own daughter's departure. At the town limits, Emma pulled over at the old gas station that had been closed for years. She reached into her jacket and pulled out her own letter, a single sheet of paper folded carefully. "For my mom," she explained, getting out to slip it under the front door. "She'll find it when she comes to check on the building tomorrow morning. She still has the key from when she worked here in high school." Sarah watched Emma's silhouette in the dim light, understanding that this moment was as momentous for her as it was painful. Emma was leaving behind her own history, her own family, her own version of everything familiar and safe. When Emma returned to the car, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Ready?" Sarah looked back at the sleeping town one final time. Somewhere, behind them, her parents slept peacefully, unaware that their world was about to shatter. In a few hours, her mother would knock on her bedroom door, then push it open to find only an empty bed and a letter that would change everything. "I'm ready," Sarah said, and meant it. Emma smiled, the first genuine, unreserved smile Sarah had seen from her in months, and pulled back onto the highway. The road stretched ahead of them, leading west toward possibility and uncertainty in equal measure. As the lights of Millbrook faded in the rearview mirror, Sarah felt something she'd never experienced before, the terrifying, exhilarating sensation of free fall. She was no longer Pastor Matthew's daughter, no longer the good girl who colored inside the lines and never questioned authority. She was simply Sarah, heading into the unknown with the woman she loved. The radio played softly as they drove through the darkness, and Sarah found herself thinking about the last thing Emma had said to her at the bridge. "Run away with me before they turn our love into a sin." They were running now, racing against the dawn and the discovery that would surely follow. But for the first time in her life, Sarah wasn't running away from something. She was running toward it. Miles passed in comfortable silence, punctuated by quiet conversation about practical things. Where to stop for gas, which route would be fastest, what they'd do first when they reached Portland. But underneath the logistics, Sarah sensed the weight of what they'd both sacrificed for this chance at authenticity. As the first pale light of dawn began to creep across the horizon, Sarah realized she was no longer the same person who had knelt in prayer at St. Mary's Church just 24 hours earlier. That frightened, conflicted girl was gone, left behind with everything else in Millbrook. The woman sitting in this car, watching the sun rise over an unfamiliar landscape, was someone new, someone who had chosen love over fear, truth over convenience, possibility over security. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was theirs to travel together. For the first time in her life, that felt like enough. 6 months later. The morning light filtering through their apartment windows in Portland's Alberta district was different from Ohio sunshine, softer somehow, filtered through Pacific Northwest clouds that seemed to wrap the city in perpetual possibility. Sarah sat at the small table they'd found at a thrift store, nursing her second cup of coffee and watching Emma work at her easel by the window. Their apartment was tiny, a studio with barely enough room for a bed, a kitchenette, and Emma's art supplies. But it was theirs. The walls were covered with Emma's paintings, bold, abstract pieces that seemed to capture the energy and freedom they'd both discovered in this new city. Sarah's writing desk occupied one corner, overflowing with notebooks and the beginnings of stories she'd never had the courage to imagine back home. The phone rang, jarring them both from their comfortable morning routine. They'd kept the landline despite the expense because Sarah's cell phone had been on her parents' plan, another connection to their old life that had to be severed. "I'll get it," Sarah said, though they both knew who it probably was. The only people who called were Sarah's boss at the bookstore where she'd found work, Emma's professors at the Art Institute, and occasionally, "Hello? Sarah Matthews." The voice was crisp, official. "This is Detective Morrison with the Millbrook Police Department." Sarah's blood turned to ice. In the 6 months since they'd left, she'd managed to convince herself that the aftermath of their departure had settled into resigned acceptance. She'd been wrong. "Detective Morrison, are my parents okay?" "Your parents are fine, physically. But Sarah, you need to understand the position you've put them in. Your disappearance has been an ongoing investigation. We've been working with the FBI, following leads across multiple states." Sarah sank into a chair, her hand trembling as she gripped the phone. Emma looked up from her painting, concern creasing her features. "I left a letter explaining everything. I made it clear I wasn't in danger." A letter isn't enough when a young woman from a prominent family simply vanishes overnight. Do you have any idea what the past 6 months have been like for your parents? For this community? The detective's words hit like physical blows. Sarah had imagined hurt and disappointment, but she'd underestimated the broader consequences of their escape. "We've traced this call, Sarah. We know you're in Portland. Now, I need you to listen very carefully." Sarah hung up without waiting to hear more. Her hands shook as she stared at the phone, the reality of their situation crashing down on her with renewed force. "What's wrong?" Emma was beside her now, paint still wet on her fingers. "The police. They've been looking for us. Looking for me. They traced the call. They know we're in Portland." Emma's face went pale. "What does that mean?" Before Sarah could answer, the phone rang again. This time Emma answered. "Hello? Yes, she's here, but..." "What? No, absolutely not. She's an adult who made her own choice. I don't care what you think about." "Hello? Hello?" Emma hung up, her jaw clenched with anger. "Different detective. They want you to come home voluntarily, or they'll consider other options." Sarah felt the walls of their carefully constructed new life closing in around them. "Other options? I think they're trying to scare us. You're 23, Sarah. You have the right to live wherever you want." But even as Emma said it, they both understood that legal rights and small-town reality were often very different things. Sarah came from a prominent family in a conservative community. Her father was a respected religious leader. Her disappearance would have been seen not just as a personal tragedy, but as a community scandal requiring resolution. The next few hours passed in tense silence, both of them jumping at every sound in the hallway, every car that slowed outside their building. When the knock finally came at their door that afternoon, they were almost relieved. Sarah Matthews? The woman was in her 40s, professionally dressed, with kind eyes that reminded Sarah painfully of her mother. "I'm Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a family counselor. Your parents asked me to come speak with you." "How did you find us?" "The same way the police did." "Sarah, may I come in? I think we need to talk." Against her better judgment, Sarah stepped aside to let the woman enter. Dr. Walsh looked around their small apartment with the trained eye of someone accustomed to reading environments for clues about the people who inhabited them. "This is nice," she said, and seemed to mean it. "You've built something here." Emma remained by her easel, protective and wary. "Are you here to drag Sarah back to Ohio?" "I'm here because 2 parents are desperate to understand what happened to their daughter. Sarah, your father hasn't slept through the night since you left. Your mother, she blames herself for not seeing how unhappy you were." The words hit their target with surgical precision. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes as she imagined her parents' suffering, the questions that must have tormented them through 6 months of uncertainty. "I left a letter," she said weakly. "You left a note." 30 words about being in love with Emma and needing to live authentically. Sarah, that's not an explanation. That's a grenade with a very short fuse. Doctor. Walsh sat down on their second-hand couch, her manner more therapist than interrogator. Tell me about your life here. Are you happy? The question was simple, but the answer was complex. Sarah looked around their apartment, at Emma's paintings, and her own writing scattered across every surface. They'd built something beautiful here, something real. But it had come at a cost that sometimes felt almost unbearable. Most of the time, Sarah said honestly. But it's complicated. Love usually is. Sarah, I need you to know that your parents aren't trying to destroy what you've found here. They're trying to understand it. Your father. He's been meeting with other religious leaders, reading books about sexuality and faith. He's struggling, but he's trying. Sarah's breath caught. The image of her conservative father researching LGBTQ issues was so unexpected it almost seemed impossible. What about the police investigation? That ends today, assuming you're willing to make a phone call. Sarah, you're an adult. No one can force you to come home. But your parents need to hear your voice, need to know you're truly safe, and this is truly your choice. Emma moved closer to Sarah, taking her hand in a gesture of solidarity. And then, they'll leave us alone? Dr. Walsh hesitated. They'll stop looking for you. But Sarah, running away solved the immediate problem of how to leave home. It didn't solve the deeper problem of how to maintain a relationship with your family while living as your authentic self. Some problems don't have solutions, Emma said, defensively. Some do, though. And sometimes the solutions require more courage than running away did. The words stung because they contained truth. Sarah had been brave enough to leave everything behind for love, but she hadn't been brave enough to fight for acceptance. She'd chosen escape over confrontation, exile over education. What are you suggesting? Sarah asked. I'm suggesting that there might be a middle ground between hiding who you are and cutting all ties with everyone who loves you. Your parents are willing to come here, to Portland, to meet with both of you, to try to understand. Sarah felt Emma's hand tighten in hers. The idea of her parents in their apartment, seeing their life together, was both terrifying and oddly hopeful. And if the meeting goes badly, if they can't accept us, then at least you'll know you tried. And Sarah, at least they'll have seen that you're genuinely happy, that this isn't some phase or rebellion. Sometimes that's enough to plant seeds of acceptance that grow over time. Sarah looked at Emma, searching her face for guidance. They'd built their new life on the foundation of complete separation from the old one. The idea of allowing those worlds to intersect felt dangerous, like inviting an earthquake into their carefully constructed stability. But Dr. Walsh was right about one thing. Running away had been the easy part. The hard part was learning, to live with the consequences, including the ongoing pain of familial estrangement. When? Sarah asked quietly. Your parents are at a hotel downtown. They could be here this evening if you're willing. Emma's face went through a series of expressions: fear, anger, resignation, and finally something that might have been hope. Sarah, it's your choice. But if we're going to do this, we do it together. Sarah thought about the girl who had knelt in St. Mary's Church 6 months ago, praying for guidance while her heart broke with secrets. That girl had been brave enough to risk everything for love. Maybe the woman she'd become could be brave enough to risk that love for the possibility of reconciliation. Okay, she said. Tell them they can come. As Dr. Walsh left to make arrangements, Sarah and Emma sat together on their couch, watching the Portland skyline through their window. In a few hours, Sarah's parents would see this view, would see the life their daughter had chosen to build 3,000 miles from everything they'd taught her to value. Whatever happens, Emma said softly. We have this. We have us. Sarah nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead to the evening's confrontation. She thought about her father's probable reaction to their tiny apartment, her mother's face when she saw Emma's paintings of two women in various stages of intimacy. She thought about the careful words she'd need to find to explain 6 months of happiness built on a foundation of their pain. But for the first time since they'd arrived in Portland, Sarah also allowed herself to hope. Hope that love could be bigger than fear, that understanding could grow from confusion, that families could stretch and bend without breaking entirely. The last thing Emma had told her that night at the bridge was to run away before their love became a sin. But maybe, Sarah thought as she watched the sun set over their adopted city, the real challenge wasn't avoiding judgment, it was transforming it. In 3 hours, she would find out if such transformation was possible. And for the first time, in 6 months, she was ready to be not just authentic, but brave. The phone rang again. This time, Sarah answered without hesitation. "Hello, Dad." The sound of her father's voice, thick with emotion and 6 months of questions, filled their small apartment with the weight of everything they'd left behind and the possibility of everything they might still build together. "Sarah," he said. And in that single word, she heard forgiveness beginning to grow alongside the pain. "We're coming home to you." Home. The word had meant so many different things over the past 6 months. Tonight, it might finally mean something new. Not a place you were born into, but a space you created with courage, love, and the willingness to keep fighting for the people who mattered most, even when that fight required more bravery than running away ever had.